Beautiful. Okay. There we go. Welcome to everybody that joined us. We are very excited to have you here. This month's webinar is about aches and pains. And we are very excited to show you not only some acupressure for aches and pains, but also a little bit of Tui Na, in case you're curious about learning a little more about that. So we're going to talk about what aches and pains actually mean from a traditional Chinese medicine perspective, how it can present in the body, what are indicators that your animal is in pain, and how you can work and take a more integrative approach using veterinary care, Tui Na, acupressure, and other members of your wellness team. So, a question that I get asked a lot from clients of mine and students is, how can I support my animal if they're in pain? As pet parents and horse owners, we usually get frustrated when we see that our animal's struggling, but we don't know how to help them. And this is probably one of the more common things that we see. There are a lot of different reasons that animals can be in pain, and these are just a few of them. Usually it's an injury, maybe a more chronic illness. There's some inflammation in the body, meaning the immune system is overworking or fighting something off. It could be a natural product of aging, or it could actually be a physical manifestation of emotional trauma, which is a really interesting aspect we're going to talk a little bit more about a little bit further in. But first, I want to talk a little bit about a wellness team, because I tend to get questions about this quite a bit. Usually when people start approaching us about acupressure, it means that they're already open-minded to complementary therapies as a practice to help support their animals, which means they usually have some of the following people on their wellness team, whether that be a holistic veterinarian or a traditional veterinarian, a chiropractor or physiotherapist, an internal medicine specialist. If you have an animal with a chronic illness or something with cancer, usually there are practitioners that work specifically with cases like that. You can have an acupressurist or a Tui Na practitioner on your team. And if your pet has IBS or a sensitive stomach, a nutritionist is also helpful. I do want to preface this by saying that acupressure is not meant to be a substitute for proper veterinary care. Please see your vet first if you have a major concern. They're also useful in cases where you want to get blood work and find out what's going on internally, so you can help support the systems that are weaker for things like injuries and x-rays, also very important. And there are, of course, contraindications, which if you've taken any of our online classes, you've probably learned about them. But there are specific indicators where we recommend our acupressure practitioners to not do a session and have the animal see the vet first. Some examples of these, especially if you're a beginner, are pregnancy, breeding, open wounds, any kind of physical trauma. If the animal's been hit by a car, obviously you want to take them to the vet first. If they have any broken bones, anything like that. If they've just had heavy exercise or are about to have heavy exercise, and if it's before or after mealtime, you don't want to do a session, but always good to see your vet first if you think that your animal's in pain. So there are many reasons why your animal might be in pain, and these include muscle or tendon injury. This is common in animals with repetitive strain injuries. If you play ball with them for 7 hours a day, or if you have the horse, for example, always on the same lead and never change direction, they can have more strain on one side than the other, which can also cause a chronic joint condition if it's not well balanced between the body, or if they don't have proper supplementation in their diet. Internal inflammation is a really common one. These could be things like chemicals in their environment, food that doesn't agree with them, something like allergies. Could also be IBS, kidney disease. Anything that causes inflammation internal in the body can cause pain. If the animal is recovering from surgery, this is also a good time to do general maintenance sessions on your animal. Of course, as we age, our joints lose some of their fluidity and mobility. Our body tends to hurt a little more. Our muscles aren't quite as strong as they used to be. So there are some natural progressions as we get older that can show us that our animals are in pain. And there are a couple of lifestyle changes we're going to talk about a little bit later that we can do to help support those. Another reason your animal might be in pain is overwhelming emotions. And we're going to talk about that in a minute. So what is pain from a TCM perspective? Pain manifests in the body as a sign of yin-yang imbalance. Yin and yang are the two components of qi, or life force energy. And if that qi or blood is stagnated, meaning it's stopped moving, or blocked, meaning there's something in the way, that can present in the body as pain. So if, for example, you work sitting in an office and you sit in a chair all day, you're blocking not only your lower limb meridians, but also any that pass through your torso because you're seated in a chair. So making sure that you're moving and stretching every now and then is really important to make sure you don't end up with a chronic pain condition. Pain can also be a result of exposure to a major pathogen, and we are going to have an entire webinar later in the year about the 6 major pathogens. But in traditional Chinese medicine, for example, there is wind, cold, damp, and heat. There are a couple of them. But if your animal has exposure to these, they can present with certain indicators, and some of them include manifestations of pain. As we talk about manifestations, emotions, if we hold on to them, can actually cause pain in our body. And I want to talk about that for a minute. When we sit and stew in certain emotions, it actually changes our vibrational frequency. So when we learn about acupressure and we learn about what to do before a session, we learn a lot about grounding and making sure that our energy is well balanced before we go into the session so that we're not affecting the animal's qi with ours. So when we sit in emotions, for example, grief, it actually results in the physical thickening of lung tissue in our body or our animal's body and causes pain in our chest. That's that tightness you feel in your chest. Grief is governed by the metal element, and each of the 5 elements govern an emotion. So I'll give you a couple more examples. The water element, the emotion associated with it is fear. So if you think about what fear feels like in your body, this is your fight or flight response. So automatic processes that happen in your body, such as digestion, actually slow down because your body is primed to have a physical response. So it's saying, where do I need to divert my energy in order to avoid fight, flight, or freeze and have that response? The wood element governs anger. So if you think about when you're really, really angry, how that feels in your body, you can feel your body temperature rising. There's actually a condition called liver heat rising, which presents as aggression. The fire element governs joy. When we think about how our body feels when we're happy is one thing, but when we take it too far and you're so happy that you sometimes can't move, this is called mania. And it can also result in some strange nerve sensations in our body. The final element is the earth element, and this is probably the easiest to imagine besides grief. And this element governs worry or anxiety because the earth element has to do with feeling grounded and belonging. If we are anxious or feel like we don't belong, that usually results in an upset stomach. It usually results in tension in the torso area and can greatly affect how our body processes food, because the earth element is, of course, stomach and spleen. But if we are so anxious, can actually eventually cause physical pain. So if you think about an animal that's so high strung that they end up getting chronic diarrhea or IBS. These are all things that if left without any help can result in more chronic issues, which is why emotional issues, I think, are overlooked a lot. So I wanted to make sure to touch on that. So what does pain actually look like in the body? There are a lot of different examples, but some of the most common ones are avoidance of touch, especially in the area that they're sensitive to. If it's joint related or spine related, sometimes the animal can walk unevenly or distribute their weight unevenly. Usually the animal will seek isolation, especially in dogs and cats, because in the wild, in wolves and big cats that our domesticated ones are descended from, a sign of weakness in the wild sometimes means that your pack will turn on you. So when they're injured, sometimes they seek isolation, especially if it's very, very severe. And if you think about humans, this is also something that we tend to do. If we're in pain, we tend to isolate ourselves from others. We show disinterest in previously enjoyed activities. We tend to be more irritable or unfriendly towards people. Our appetite is affected. Some people tend to eat more when they're in pain, and some animals will do that also. But I find loss of appetite is a little more common. This can also present as stiffness, or if they're licking or scratching a certain area, it means they're in pain. I actually had an acupressure case where this dog that lived on a farm scratched and ripped off all the fur on his 2 front feet. And it turns out he had an allergy for 2 weeks of spring. There's a certain tree on the property that bloomed that he was allergic to. And he was so irritable and in pain on his feet that he kept licking and scratching, because there's actually a detox point located on the top of the foot. And he was trying to self-soothe, but of course the owner didn't know that there was an acupressure point there. But if you notice your horse or dog or cat licking or scratching a certain area, it's definitely worth looking into, because sometimes that is how they communicate their pain to us. So how do we actually approach a session when we're talking about animals in pain or that have aches? We follow the same assessment process we would always follow. So we do our 4 exams after we prepare ourselves during the pre-session. We do our opening. And again, we remember that there is a connection. We're talking about the law of integrity between the external indicators and the internal organ systems and emotions. So being able to use our knowledge of traditional Chinese medicine to interpret what they're saying. A lot of people like solving the mystery. When you learn a little bit more about the theory, it's a lot more putting all the pieces in place. But do know that pain is a really complex issue because it is influenced by the animal's lifestyle, their breed. Bigger breeds usually have more joint pain, and especially breeds that grow very rapidly. In horses, if they're bred, for example, thoroughbreds tend to be bred for certain purposes, so that's something else to always take into consideration. And the animal's environment. Are there a lot of hills where the animal lives that they could have tripped and fallen? Is the ground uneven? Do they run up and down the stairs a lot? Are they playing too much fetch, for example? Or are the trainers that you're working with maybe pushing the horse a little bit too hard and he hit his leg on a jump? All things that we're looking for the root cause of where the pain is coming from. So before I get into a couple of points with you, I want to go over some point work techniques. One more thing I should mention, when we do our pre-session, we always set our healing intention. So if you're going into an animal that you've never worked on before, but you know, and the owner has said to you that their main concern is that their animal is in pain, this is an example of a healing intention that you can set, that the purpose of the session is to help facilitate qi flow and decrease sensations of pain. If the animal, for example, does present with joint pain issues, then decreasing sensations of pain, and you can even be more specific and say something like improve the flow of qi through the joints. But again, it's always case specific. So these may look a little bit familiar to you, but a couple of point work techniques in case you haven't seen these before and you want to try some of these points on your animal. The first is anfa, and this is called direct pressure. It's using your thumb, and it's used on thicker areas of the body. So usually you slide down the meridian with a flatter thumb and then come up into the point itself. The next is called the 2-finger technique. A lot of students also call this the tent because you take the middle finger and put it on the nail of your index finger and make a little tent with your fingers. This is used more on the extremities of the body, so areas where there's a little less fat and a little more tendon. Remember that you're using really light pressure because the acupoints and meridians are just underneath the skin. So you're going to see a lot of points coming up. Remember that you can come back to this at any time if you want to review what these are for. There's also very good sections at the end of AccuDog, AccuHorse, and AccuCat that go through points for specific conditions, but these are just a few of the ones we think are most effective. So acupoints for general pain relief. Most of the points that I was looking at focus on a specific area. These are the ones I could find that are a little more general. So the first on the list is pronounced Ba Hui, and it's located at the lumbosacral joint, so where the lumbar vertebrae meet the sacral vertebrae on the dorsal spine. It's located in the same place for horses, but basically because of where it's located, where the hips connect to the spine, it's good for general pain relief. It's also called the point of 100 meetings. So any lameness, rheumatism, or paralysis of the hindquarters, arthritis of the hip joint, or any dysplasia, it's really good for. It also helps rebalance because we know anything along the spine is really helpful, especially in older animals. I find usually, unless they've had an injury to their front end, it's usually their back end that starts to show weakness first. So it can be a good early introduction to joint support for animals that are starting to move into senior ages. Spleen 21. This is the connecting point of all connecting points. It's a very special point. If you haven't heard about it before, its job is to regulate and facilitate blood and qi flow. We learned not that long ago that pain presents in the body if blood and qi is stagnated or blocked. So when spleen 21 helps to regulate and facilitate that, it helps with generalized body pain. It also fills in gaps in qi anywhere in the body, benefits blood disorders, and helps with fatigue or lethargy. So if you notice your animals may be a little more tired than usual, you can also use this on you, which is really great. But I find that it can be really helpful. It's easy to find. Physically, it's located on the lateral aspect, so the side of the chest, in the 6th intercostal space at the level of the point of the shoulder. So if you're having a hard time counting ribs, if, for example, your animal is a little bit rounder, what you can do if they're standing up or laying down is take one of their forelimbs and very gently lift it until the upper part of their leg is parallel to the floor. Fall off the back of the elbow, and you'll fall right into spleen 21. Which I really like because it's easy to find, less anatomical words for everybody. So getting into more specific points to help with pain relief. I want to talk about immune support because if the body is having an issue with inflammation or joint pain or a chronic issue or they're aging, immune system can always use some support, even if the animal is entirely healthy otherwise. These are also good general maintenance points, but we know that the lung governs the immune system. So we picked some lung points and its sister is large intestine, but we're going to get into some of these points. So the first one is large intestine 4. It's located on the medial side of the carpus. This point is the source point for the large intestine meridian and the master point, which is really great. Strong energetics from this one. Its job is to tonify the protective qi or Wei Qi. In traditional Chinese medicine, this is your immune system. So when you breathe in healthy air and you eat healthy food and everything gets broken down and processed, it forms together to form Wei Qi, which is then spread throughout your body so that your immune system is strong. It also helps to facilitate qi flow and, of course, alleviate pain. So this one is located between the first and second metacarpal bones. So if we count from the inside of the leg to the outside, if the dog doesn't have a dew claw, then it's going to be where the scar is. Large intestine 11 is also called the allergy point. So if you have an animal that gets inflamed in the spring, which I know a lot of humans do and start showing sinus conditions this time of year, that large intestine 11 is a really, really great point because it builds Wei Qi, that immune system qi. It also helps to regulate the lungs and drain pathogenic influences from them. So it's a general immune supporter, and there's a couple of easy ways to find it. If you flex the animal's elbow, it's going to be in the crease, the lateral end of the cubital crease, halfway between the biceps brachial tendon and the lateral epicondyle of the humerus. That's a lot of words to say. It's going to be in the crease here. We know that the lung is the most medial, but you can see the large intestine meridian actually starts medial and comes lateral. And so it is in the crease of that elbow there. Stomach 36, my favorite point. The stomach 36 is the master point for the abdomen and the gastrointestinal tract. So it is an immunostimulation point. It's also what's called a high qi point. A large portion of our immune system is in our gut. So this point helps with stomach ulcers, gastritis, indigestion, colic, lack of appetite, all of that stuff. So if you notice that your animal's stool or manure is looking a little bit off, this point is always a good, when in doubt and you don't know what to do, this is a good general, kind of covers everything because it helps with immunostimulation and our nutrition, which helps fuel the rest of our body. So there's a couple ways to find this one. One is to count down from stomach 35. What most of our students do is once they know it's on the craniolateral, meaning towards the front, but still on the side, part of the pelvic limb, it's 1 finger's breadth lateral to the tibial crest, which is this right here, in the lateral portion of the cranial tibial muscle. So there is a muscle in their legs right here. I find if you find the point of their knee, slide 1 finger's width lateral and 1 finger's width distal or towards the feet, you will end on stomach 36. And in all animals, there is a slight depression there. And in almost all animals that I work on, this point is actually warm because they're eating poor food or they're not absorbing their nutrients properly, or they're having an immune reaction of some kind. Usually the lung and stomach are things that show up in most animals, so you can never hurt by doing stomach 36. The last point I want to talk about for immune system issues is bladder 17. You may see it and think it's an association point, but if you remember, 13, 14, and 15 are association points, and then it starts again at 18. So 17 is actually an influential point, and we're going to talk about this one a couple times today, but it's the influential point for blood. And its job is to help get more nutrients and oxygen to the muscles of the body. It helps with circulation, it helps move everything through so that when you work on that Wei Qi and you work on helping the immune system, the blood cells can carry all those helpful vital substances to the rest of the body. So this one is located, as with other association points, on dogs and cats, 1.5 soon lateral to the edge of the dorsal spine. And this one is in the spinous process of the 7th thoracic vertebrae. Now we're going to see some horse examples because I know we have some horse people watching this. We're going to talk about joint support. Everybody's favorite topic. We do have an entire other webinar on joint support if you want to watch the replay, because we break it down into muscles, tendons, and ligaments, and bone to cover all three of the main joint issues. But here is a kind of summary of what we're looking at. So bladder 11 is the influential point for bone. Again, it is also not an association point. It helps with arthritis, joint deformities, cervical spondylosis, neck and spinal pain, stiffness, and because of where it's located, locally it relieves soreness and pain of the interscapular, so shoulder region over here. So there are points based on where the pain is located in the body, especially if it's joint pain, so it's a little easier to focus in on one specific area. Spleen 9 is a really helpful point. It helps with muscle because spleen governs muscle. And this one is located at the depression at level of patellar ligaments, half a soon in front of the saphenous vein. So I know my horse people know what the saphenous vein is. For my dog people, it's a big vein located in the back of the leg, along the back of this big bone here. It's also a really helpful detox point, in case anybody's curious. The next is gallbladder 34. This is another influential point for tendons and ligaments. It helps with the flow of blood in the legs. So especially if it's an older animal and their circulation is a little bit poor, it can help get that blood flow and all those important oxygen and nutrients to the lower part of their limbs. It also helps relax tendons with muscle cramps or spasms. Physically, it's located in the lateral aspect of the hind limbs, so on the outside of the back leg, in a small depression, cranial and distal, so cranial towards the head and distal slightly below the head of the fibula. So it looks like it's harder to find on a dog or cat. Actually, on a horse, it's a little bit easier. The next point I want to talk about is bladder 40. If you've taken a class with us, you will recognize this point. It is the master point for the hips and back. So any animal that has difficulty with their lower half, it is very great for that, especially if the pain is in the hips, stifles, or lower back. It also helps relax sinews and muscles. So if the animal's been very active lately and needs kind of a cool down after an event, this can be really helpful to help their muscles relax so they can rest more easily. This one is located at the midpoint of the transverse crease of the popliteal fossa. So there is a big muscle that comes down along the back of their rump and one that comes up their leg. In animals that are not overweight, it's easy to find because there is a crease there where bladder 40 is. The last two, if you've seen webinars with us before, you should be expecting these 2 points for joint support. Kidney 3 is the source point for the kidney, and bladder 60 is what's called the aspirin point, and these two can actually be held together. These points help to tonify the kidneys, source chi, which is something that depletes over time, blood and essence, and helps to stabilize that kidney chi. So there's a lot that it can do. Kidney also governs bone. So they do work together very well. And especially in seniors, if they can only handle so many points, this is a great point combination for when you can only choose, for example, 2 to 3 points. So in order to find them, non-anatomical language, find the thin skin along the back of their leg, gently pinch it and slide your fingers down. Where it stops naturally is just going to be where the lateral and medial malleolus are. The medial malleolus is on the inside, that is kidney 3. The finger that's on the lateral side of the leg is going to be bladder 60. And these two, again, remember your pressure is very gentle, but these two can help very much with joint pain. All right, moving into muscle pain. We have a few points here. The first is spleen 3. This is the source point for the spleen meridian. It helps to benefit the transportation and transformation functions of the spleen So if you remember learning about yin organ function versus yang organ function, this will sound familiar. Physically, it's located at the midpoint between the flat part of their foot, between where their toes are and where this is here. So it's about halfway up their second metatarsal. If you do happen to have a breed that has a dew claw on their back foot, depending on how high it is, it's about halfway up that metatarsal bone on their foot. And again, there is a depression there, so it makes it a little easier to find because we know spleen is the most medial meridian on the hind leg. So if you slide up from the most medial side of that second digit and slide up, your finger will fall into spleen 3. Here's spleen 9 again, which is delightful. This point is not in any specific category. It's just a helpful point to know. It helps to regulate and strengthen spleen, stomach, and water pathways. Also benefits edema, stifle pain, and osteoarthritis. So for those unfamiliar with edema, it's water retention, especially in the lower parts of the legs, that causes swelling. Especially if your horse or dog has an injury, this can cause some swelling in the lower parts of the limbs. So it can be a very helpful point to help things move through and decrease some of that water retention and inflammation. To find it, again, the medial side of the pelvic limb in a depression between the caudal border of the tibia, which is this thick bone here, and the gastrocnemius muscle, which is back here. So we saw this one on a horse over here, same point on a dog, just so we can see them both. We also talked about bladder 17 previously. It is the influential point for blood. And we also talked about where it is on a dog. It's 1.5 soon, as with other association points, lateral to the caudal border of the spinous process of the 7th thoracic vertebrae. So remember 13, 14, 15, then we skip 16, 17, and then start again with the association point for liver, which is bladder 18. But those are a couple of points that help with muscle pain. If you know a practitioner that also does Tui Na or massage, these can also both be really helpful, or physio, actually, that works too. All right, one more category, I believe, and then we're on to some Tui Na, which will be super exciting. So a couple points for circulation. First is lung 9. This is the source point for the lung meridian. It's also the influential point for arteries, which I think most people tend to forget. It helps to regulate and tonify the lungs and improve circulation. So this one is at the level of heart 7, so same as this one, but on the medial side of the leg at the radiocarpal joint. So this is where the radius and the carpus join together. And this one is in front of the radial artery, or cranial too. Heart 7 is actually slightly behind. We also talked about spleen 21. So you can see that a lot of these points actually have multiple purposes, but know that there are 361 points. So there are a lot we could be teaching you, but we're trying to teach you multiple purposes for the same point so that you can add them to your toolbox. Spleen 21, again, is the connecting point of all connecting points. And this is, so you can see it on a cat instead of a dog. It's located in the 6th intercostal space at the level of the point of the shoulder. So if you lift up their foreleg and the top part of their leg is parallel to the floor, fall off the back of their elbow into that spot right there. Heart 7, we haven't talked about yet. This is the source point for the heart meridian. So not only does it regulate and tonify the heart, but it helps to clear heart fire and heat, which are 2 of our 6 major pathogens, and it helps to improve blood flow for the forelimbs. So we already learned about a point that helps with blood flow in the hind limb, and this one helps with the forelimbs. So depending on where your animal's issue is, you can provide more specific and appropriate points when you know which ones work which areas. Bladder 17, no surprise, also helps with circulation because it is the influential point for blood and the diaphragm, which is the nice little organ underneath our lungs that can actually spasm if we are under extreme stress. So not only does it regulate, tonify, and invigorate the blood, but it facilitates blood flow helps regulate blood pressure, and helps those with heart conditions. Do know that most animals with heart conditions, it's recommended you see the vet first to find out more information about it, and only advanced practitioners to work on animals with heart conditions. Our last point here is spleen 6. This is the master point for the urogenital system and the rear portion of the abdomen. This point helps to invigorate the blood and cool heat in the blood. So making sure that everything's moving the way it should, but that there's not excess heat or inflammation being spread throughout the body. If you're working on a senior specifically, there are a few things to note. You cannot use as many acupressure points, which means 2 to 3 bilaterally total. Because of most of the meridians that we teach you, of the 12 major meridians, are all bilateral. There are 2 that are not. The conception vessel and the governing vessel are unilateral, meaning if you choose a point on this meridian, if you're talking bilaterally, it only counts as half a point. We show you again all of these points so that you have multiple uses for the same point, so you can maximize your effectiveness by choosing points, for example, more locally located. If it's a hind limb issue versus a forelimb issue, instead of using a general one, you can use a more focused, appropriate point. Typically in seniors, the conditions are more chronic, deficient, and internal in nature, which is when your general wellness points that we showed you at the beginning would be especially helpful. And remember to always check your alarm points, especially when you have reactive association points. We recommend this to everyone with all sessions, but a special reminder for seniors. So now we're going to get into a little bit of Tui Na, because we thought it would be an especially good addition to this one because of some of its benefits. So first, we're going to talk about what is Tui Na. The literal translation is push and grasp. It's a combination of rhythmic compressions and manipulations along meridians, muscles, tissues, and acupoints. So it's similar to human massage, except that we're working not only along muscles and tissues, but also we're including meridians and acupoints in where we're massaging. Benefits of Tui Na include nourishing the zongfu or internal organs. So this is our lung, kidney, spleen, stomach, for example. It helps to regulate the flow of qi and blood, to enhance the body's harmonious, balanced flow of qi, which we know, again, that in traditional Chinese medicine, pain is blocked or stagnated qi or blood. So making sure that those flow smoothly can greatly decrease pain and sensations of pain in the body. So I'm going to show you a couple of quick techniques, and we actually have videos to include with that. So we learned Anfa. We saw these 2 pictures earlier. Anfa's literal translation is direct pressure, and these are a couple of different techniques you can use for this. The purpose of Anfa is to stimulate the energetics of those acupoints, increase the circulation, relieve pain, and disperse any stagnations in the meridians. So we learned the thumb technique, the 2-finger technique, and this one is called cross hands. It's usually used on larger animals or those with bigger muscle masses. So for example, you could use it on a Great Dane or a pony, but definitely not on a Chihuahua, definitely bigger animals. And you literally just cross your hands on top of the point. We're going to learn a little bit more about pressure. And we are putting together, if you didn't see our Tui Na webinar with NabCam, we are putting together a version of it for our site in case you want to watch that replay. So here is a video demonstrating some Anfa techniques.
The first Tui Na technique that I'm going to show you is called Anfa. Anfa means direct pressure. The first one we tend to work with, because it's easier, is to go flat-handed and then come up into the point using the tip of your thumb, the soft tip of your thumb. And again, you can do that very simply by going flat-handed, then up into the point. The amount of pressure you're going to put on depends on how long and what you're looking for. The initial needs to be very gentle. And then as you can feel the resistance giving way, you can feel your thumb going a little deeper into the location of the point. The next technique, the next Anfa technique is take your pointer finger, put your middle finger on top of it, make a little tent, and it's best used on the extremities. We're going to do stomach 36 on little Tilly, and there's stomach 36 using the 2-finger technique of Anfa.
The third technique of Anfa is called flat hand, and it's called that because you use the flat of your hand when you're applying this technique. What you'll want to do is focus your energy on the center of your palm, which is where pericardium 8 is located, and that's where energy is emitted from your body. So you can use this technique on small dogs and sort of the larger parts of their body, the barrel, a little bit down the legs if you want to, but for the spleen meridian, it works really well. So you can place your hand on the dog and kind of focus on pericardium 8. Another technique that you can use in the Anfa sequence is called cross hands. This technique is simply crossing your hands, and when you do so, you'll want to use it on large dogs only, and only in areas of larger muscle mass. So the other thing that's great about this technique is that you can use it to access acupressure points specifically. So you'll want to just, when you're doing this, move slowly into the point, hold it till you feel a release. You can come out, move down to the next point, paying attention to keep your elbows and your shoulders rounded to allow the energy to flow.
I always love that video because Amy and Nancy describe it so well. One thing that Nancy pointed out at the end of the video is that we want to make sure to keep our elbows rounded because, again, if they're locked, we're blocking the flow of chi and blood through the meridians in our upper arms. The next technique is called Tui Na or pushing. This may be more familiar to you if you've ever had massage before. This technique is used to help stimulate the lymph system. So the lymph is actually part of our immune system that carries pathogens and toxins out of our body. So if that lymph system is stagnated or not moving, then those toxins can build up in our body instead of being detoxed and processed more thoroughly. It also helps to relax muscles, clear pain, and dredge or clear the channels. So you can see she's pushing in one direction and very gently coming back in the other direction. You're going to see a video demonstrating this shortly.
Tui Na is one of the most versatile Tui Na techniques. It can be used in the adaptive stage along the bladder meridian and the analgesic stage along most of the channels to clear them by removing obstructions and invigorating chi and blood along the channels. Tui Na means pushing. When performing Tui Na, you are literally pushing along the surface of the horse, tracing the meridians you have selected to clear. This technique is also known as dredging the channel. I'm going to show you 2 variations you can use to dredge the meridian. The first is using your 3 fingers to glide forward and back along the meridian or a segment of the meridian. For instance, if you want to clear edema on the lower hind leg, you can use this technique to glide up and back along the spleen meridian. The second technique is commonly used on the horse's neck and trunk. Using the heel of your hand, you are going to glide forward and back along the horse's neck or body on the bladder meridian during the adaptive stage. And on other select channels during the analgesic stage. Think of this technique as planing wood. You are going to glide up and back, feeling the friction and sense of clearing. During the analgesic phase of your Tui Na session, performing Tui Na, moving the pathogens or stagnation down to the Jingwell points on the coronary band is the best way to release that energy.
That was Nancy's niece, Jill, doing a demonstration on some equines for us. A couple of things that I want to point out. When she's saying move forward and backward, she's using more pressure going forwards and less pressure coming backwards. She also talked about moving those stagnations towards the Jingwell points. If you're unfamiliar with where the points are located, you're on the lower limbs. So on dogs and cats, they're located on the nail beds of the toes. On horses, these points are located around the coronet band. The idea is to move the stagnation towards the Jingwell points so that it can disperse, very similar to how we perform an energetic clearing at the end of a session for us, or when we perform the closing. Many practitioners like to perform the closing and then touch the ground to disperse that and everything that they've cleared during the session. The third and final technique we're going to learn about is called MOFA. Literal translation is circular rubbing. This one particularly harmonizes the middle burner, which if you learned about the triple heater, this is our stomach, spleen, and in some schools, liver and gallbladder. It also helps to clear a wind cold, which is a combo pathogen we're going to learn about when we do a webinar on the 6 major pathogens. It enhances circulation and relieves pain. It also can be used to sedate or tonify an acupressure point. In the picture, you can see the hand is moving clockwise. This is how you increase the energy of a point. If you move your hand counterclockwise or in the reverse direction, this decreases the energy of a point. And we have a quick video to demonstrate this for you.
MOFA is the next Tui Na technique that we're going to cover. And it is probably the simplest of all techniques and the most common. Simply on you, if you hurt yourself, you're going to want to do MOFA. MOFA. You're going to want to move it around, get the energy away from where it hurts. By the way, if you do go in a clockwise fashion, you are bringing energy to that point. If you do the round circular motion, which is what MOFA is, just a flat, superficial, round circular motion. And if you go in the anti-clockwise or counterclockwise method, you are actually dispersing the energy. So you're going to go, oh, Tilly, do you have a little hurt there? And you're going to be just very superficial.
This is actually a natural response to pain, especially in younger children. If they hurt something, they'll rub the area to try and move the pain and disperse it from the area. So I think it's really amazing that this can be translated to use for dogs, cats, and horses also. So a couple of lifestyle adjustments you can make if you have an animal that's experiencing joint pain. You can lower the impact level of their exercises. So if they're doing a lot of height changes or elevation changes, then you can decrease that. So if, for example, they're working on cement, put them on something softer. If they're having trouble jumping up and down, you can use ramps or steps to help support them with that, especially getting in and out of the car. With horses, if they're working on uneven terrain, you can try and even it out for them a little bit. I know with seasonal changes, that can be really difficult. If you have an animal with internal inflammation, using easy to digest foods in lower quantities can be really helpful because it's more likely the animal will be able to absorb more nutrients from it, and therefore their immune system will be stronger so that they'll be able to support themselves. Again, for joints, making sure supplements have been considered and that you've seen your veterinarian for any diagnostic testing that has to be done. The importance of rest is something that's usually overlooked because in a society that tells us that our value comes from our productivity and what we can accomplish, that sometimes we forget to rest, and our animals can pick up on our busyness and our chaos in our life if it's very busy. And our horses are very adept at telling us if we are neglecting them or if we're too busy to do something for them. They're definitely not shy about telling us that maybe we need some rest and we need to take some downtime. This is also important for our animals to make sure that their system gets the time to rest. So if, for example, you're on an eventing circuit and you're constantly, whether this be dock diving for dogs, for example, or agility, or a show jumping for horses, that you always give your animal time to rest in between shows to make sure that their system can fully recover before you put them under more stress. Because exercise is actually a type of stress that we put on our bodies to help make sure that we're building more muscle and staying nice and strong. But that is all I have to say about aches and pains. If you want to learn more about Tui Na, we do have an online class where you can learn more about the techniques you just saw, as well as many other techniques, learn about the 3 stages of a session, which we talked about, or you can wait till our webinar replay is available and you can watch it that way. We do, of course, have lots of hands-on courses, and I do talk about, if you've taken this class, this will be familiar to you because usually this is where most of these concepts come from. We talked about what is a session protocol between the pre-session work, the opening, and the 4 exams, and your association points, your point work, and your closing. We've touched on all of them briefly, but you get to learn the sequence that it goes in and how to go from start to finish for a full session. These are some pictures, obviously pre-COVID, from our hands-on classes. We do have small animal, which is dog and cat, and equine classes. The bottom picture is from Happy Dog Ranch in Colorado, where we usually have our joint species classes, meaning you'll take the theory part of the class with your counterpart in either small animal or equine, and then the hands-on part is separate, which is a lot of fun. That's how I did my hands-on certifications. But definitely you meet a lot of really amazing people, and many of them I'm still in contact with to this day, which is really nice. You'll also learn a lot of key acupressure points, including more purposes for the ones that we mentioned today. The one on the left side is called yin tong. It's used for focus and concentration, especially in training. Governing vessel 26 is an emergency resuscitation point if the animal becomes unconscious. And the picture on the right looks like large intestine 11, the allergy point that we talked about. But if you more of a visual self-paced learner, most of our program is online. And if you want to see more pictures about and points for specific conditions, our 4-day class is great for that, but also there's a whole section in the back of these 3 books on specific points to help with conditions specific to that species. We also have a lot of videos and our webinar replays, some of which we mentioned, especially if you're into joint pain, want to learn more about that, or our Tui Na webinar that's coming up. But in case you're curious, our next webinar is going to be Wednesday, May 25th at 6:30 p.m. EST. Our topic is excess versus deficient conditions. By popular request, and from my in-person classes, those students also requested. So in this webinar, you're going to learn how to distinguish between an excess condition and a deficient condition for both yin and yang conditions. This is a more advanced theory-based discussion. So if you're a beginner, I would recommend starting with some theory-based classes first, maybe our overview of TCM class, or watching some other theory-based webinars first, because it may be a little bit complex in terms of terminology and understanding. So there's going to be a lot of terms thrown around you may be a little bit unfamiliar with. But thank you to everybody who came out today. If you're watching the replay and if you have any questions, please feel free to send me a message. I look very forward to seeing those of you who join us on May 25th. And I hope you have a fabulous rest of your evening. Thanks so much.